The United States continues its tactic of ramping up pressure on Iran over its nuclear ambitions. Should Saturday's meeting between the two nations fall through in any way, President Trump has promised, quote unquote, great danger for the Islamic Republic. What does the president mean, and what are the chances of this meeting bearing fruit? Here to discuss this, Ilan Berman, Senior Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council. Ilan has consulted for the CIA as well as U.S. Department of State and Defense. Ilan, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
So what does the president mean when he says Iran could face great danger?
Well, so it's a good question, and I think it speaks to the larger objective that the president is trying to get at. If you remember, back in mid-February, he reinstated the maximum pressure policy of sweeping economic sanctions on the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was the hallmark of his policy during his first term in office. But almost immediately, he signaled that he was willing to and in fact, he wanted to get to the negotiating table with Iran to really hammer out some sort of new agreement that deals more comprehensively in a more lasting fashion with its nuclear program. So that has been the game plan of the Trump administration this go round, to create leverage and then to use that leverage to compel the Iranians to come to the table. And that's why when the president sent his letter a couple of weeks ago to the Iranian Ayatollahs, he said this is an offer that is not infinite. You have a couple months to hammer out a deal with us, or all bets are off. And so everything that you're seeing now, not on the diplomatic front, but in terms of military repositioning, in terms of strategic assets being deployed, it's all part of conveying the seriousness of that timetable.
I mean, as you describe the president's approach to this, it kind of prompts me to ask the question, does the president see this as a challenge to actually reach an agreement through negotiation, since he is he's known to be such a good negotiator?
No, he's known to be such a good negotiator, but I would be sure that his Iran policy team that he's assembled, and right, advisedly, this is a different team than we saw in Trump 45, but they're probably telling them exactly what their predecessors told them half a decade ago, which is that the Iranian regime has a consistent game plan. The game plan is to buy time to engage the West in open-ended negotiations under the premise that the West doesn't attack when the West is talking, and to use that window of opportunity to build permanence in their nuclear effort. Because if you look inside the regime itself, it's enormously rickety. The Iranian economy is spiraling into a ever-deepening domestic crisis. There's a crisis of faith. In Iran, something like 2/3 of the country's 75,000 mosques are now shuttered because of lack of attendance, which is a death knell for an ideological religious regime. You have all sorts of signs of societal malaise. So the Iranian regime needs this deal very, very badly as a lifeline to keep its regime in power.
The president, as you described, maximum pressure, leverage on the outside. We're seeing unprecedented military buildup. So they have 2 aircraft carriers in the regions. We have the B-2 bombers. We have new sanctions being put in place. The Treasury Office today, Foreign Assets Control, imposed sanctions on enablers of Iran's nuclear program. You talk about a window. Are they hoping, what's that window they need to establish that nuclear presence? Because I think that is, maybe they're hoping they can outlast President Trump and his administration.
No, I think that's right. And I actually think that in the context of not so much what the Iranian regime is thinking about, but what the U.S. administration is thinking about, we're looking at 3 distinct timetables. The first is from now until October of this year, which is October of this year is when the final provisions that remain in force for the 2015 nuclear deal known as the JCPOA expire. That's when the provisions toll, and it becomes much, much harder to reimpose multilateral sanctions on Iran. So that's the first deadline. that we're looking at. The second deadline is between this summer and next summer, because every intelligence estimate that has leaked into the open source suggests that Iran has between 6 and 18 months that they need in order to perfect weaponization. Right, three components to a nuclear program. There's delivery systems, such as ballistic missiles, there's uranium enrichment, and then there's weaponization. How do you put it on a warhead? How do you miniaturize it? How do you fashion it into a weapon? So that's between this summer and next summer is when the expectation is that the Iranians will perfect that capability. And the third is next fall. Because of the political calendar. The political calendar here because of the U.S. midterms, but also the political calendar in Israel because of if Israel does not go to elections before then, and that's a distinct possibility. But if it doesn't, then Israeli elections are scheduled to take place in November of 2026. And this is a government, the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which has staked a tremendous amount of its credibility on eliminating the threat posed by a nuclear Iran. So there is an expectation that as we get closer to that political deadline of next fall, that the Israelis are going to become more and more activist and may not wait indefinitely.
Does the United States, the Trump administration, wait for the expiration of one of those three deadlines?
I think ideally the plan is no, and that's why the president set the 2-month timeline. But I think that really is the metric of success for the talks that are going to take place this weekend. The Iranian play here, I think, is very clear. The Iranians are going to try to draw out the timetable as long as possible. And so it will be a problem if we emerge from this weekend, if the president's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, emerges from this weekend with an Iranian commitment for open-ended talks that are going to take place over weeks and months. We'll have moving and shifting parameters. That's not a recipe for success. And that's a recipe for potential military action, for example, on the part of Israel, if there's a sense that there isn't movement, resolute movement towards some sort of conclusion sooner rather than later.
Do you see, Ilan, any parallels between the first administration and the conversations the engagement that took place with North Korea and Kim Jong-un and what we see here?
I think so. I think there is a parallel, right? As they say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I think you're seeing that in this context, insofar as the president's package of incentives, because remember, negotiations have to include both incentives and disincentives. The president's package of incentives, particularly looking at the frailty of the Iranian regime, at the weakness of their economy, is going to be all about reintegration into the global community, all about an upgrade of the relationship with the United States. Right now, it's non-existent. Iran would benefit tremendously from a more formal and more durable relationship with the United States. I think that's in the carrot category. In the stick category is precisely what you're seeing. Forward deployment of bombers to Diego Garcia, forward positioning of U.S. naval assets in the Persian Gulf. Those are intended to signal the bad cop scenario. If Iran does not conclude some sort of agreement that is amenable to Washington, then all bets are off, right? That's the signal.
All right. In North Korea, you're dealing with a guy who's not completely stable. In Iran, you're dealing with an ideology, a religious ideology. Will that ideology allow them to essentially back away from their nuclear program and dismantle it as the request is being made?
Well, that's really, I think, the $64,000 question, because the degree to which the regime, which is undergoing a crisis of faith on the part of the population, the regime whose ideology is increasingly seen as being bankrupt and politically untenable, whether that regime is willing to give up some of its core tenets in order to remain in business. That is going to be the proposition that the Trump administration's outreach needs to test, because simply open-ended negotiations that keep this regime in power and give them a patient pathway to a nuclear weapon, I think doesn't serve anybody's interests and is not likely to end well. So the Trump administration is at pains not only to proffer things that the Iranians can benefit from, but also to make very clear that this is not an open-ended series of talks.
Ilan, let's talk a little bit about that domestic situation there in Iran. As you've described, very unstable. You have a populace there that's really not in line with the governing regime. If they, essentially wave a white flag and back down to the United States in negotiations, does that not put them in a more vulnerable position with a people who we've already seen in the last few years? We've seen demonstrations. We've seen a populace that wants to see these guys gone.
No, that's exactly right. And I think that's the fear on the part of the Iranian regime, which is that too quick a capitulation, too comprehensive a capitulation to Washington would rebound to their detriment, would make them seem weak. On the other hand, though, if the Iranians can play this negotiation out at least a little bit, if they can garner concrete concessions from the United States, it can strengthen their regime enormously. Because remember, in addition to all these internal weaknesses that the regime has, the regime is also on its way out the door. The upper echelons of the Iranian leadership are old, they're infirm, in their 80s, in their 90s. There is generational change that is coming to Iran, whether we like it or not. The question is, will the current regime be in place 10 years from now? And the secret here, I think, for the Iranian regime is to hammer out a package of concessions from the United States and also potentially from other countries in the West that would essentially establish their permanence in the face of all these internal tensions. So that's what they're going to be trying to go for.
So, Ilan, whether it is voluntary or involuntary, the removal of their nuclear ambitions, future, what does that do for the Middle East? This, I would think, has a tremendous impact on the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East.
No, absolutely. And in fact, the last time we were in this place where you had an Iran that was moving very, very quickly towards a nuclear acquisition, it created a scenario for a potential proliferation cascade in the Middle East, where you saw multiple countries, including Saudi Arabia, including other countries in the region, that had begun to talk publicly about the need to acquire their own nuclear deterrent, right? And this tells you everything you need to know about how countries in the region see Iran. They don't see Iran as a security producer. They see it as a threat. And so taking the Iranian nuclear program off the board in a lasting way, not the way the Obama administration did when it just kicked the nuclear can down the road for a decade, but taking it off the board in a lasting way would be enormously beneficial to regional security in the Middle East. It would be a massive boon to American allies in the Persian Gulf and in the Levant, and it would calm the region, I think, immeasurably.
Ilan, we just have about a minute left. I mean, I think this clearly would benefit Israel, making them really the strongest power there in the Middle East. But is this not an opening for Turkey?
Well, there's an opening for Turkey of a different sort that's already playing out, because Turkey was the one, by all accounts, that orchestrated the rapid ouster and dismantlement of the Assad regime in Syria. And so what we're now seeing is a Turkey that is increasingly a player in the Middle East in a way that it wasn't before, a Turkey that is increasingly ambitious regionally, and a Turkey that doesn't have good relations with Israel, but at the same time is a core member of NATO. So solving the Turkey problem is going to be a challenge for another time. But for right now, everybody's watching the Iranian nuclear file closely. Turkey may benefit, but the countries that are allies of the United States, countries like Israel, but also the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Bahrain, countries that are part of the Abraham Accords or soon may be, are the ones that stand to benefit the most.
Yeah. Well, Ilan, I hope to circle back around with you next week, maybe, and after the talks take place, and we'll see what comes from them. Appreciate your insights. Very informative. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.